Women are afraid of men killing them. Men are afraid of women humiliating them.
If you feel more like roommates than partners lately, you aren't alone.
Today, our expert panel breaks down the essential foundations you need to move past daily stress and rediscover your spark.
How do relationships fail?
Complaining hardly ever works. Most of us are very practiced at speaking our complaints. Check that, because that's not inspiring another person. And if you're not inspiring another person, your relationship probably won't be inspiring. You can make a list of all the complaints that you've had about each other. And then I would suggest
a large part of couples therapy is getting the couple to say those things to each other. They might feel them internally and just say, well, it's obvious, you should know at this point that this is how I feel about you. But I think so often the other person goes, I don't, because I haven't heard that in years.
I find for most of my guys, it's really the actions that speak a lot louder than the words when it comes to being heard and seen and known.
It's death by 10,000 paper cuts in a relationship. So you have this robust garden and you're like, I just need to water it every so often. And what we don't realize is that just like anything in nature, you still got to attend to it. And if you don't have ways to protect your relationship garden, the unhelpful, toxic individualism are going to seep through and your garden's gonna die.
Stick around to learn the practical shifts that will help you stop just coexisting and start actually enjoying each other again.
What's something that somebody could do right now that would help keep that relationship alive in the realm of emotional intimacy, sexual intimacy, or just safety, respect, and trust?
for me, when I work with men, I teach them about.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Men's Therapy Podcast. I'm your host, Mark Azoulay, and we're here with another roundtable episode. This time, we're talking about relationships. So we've done a ton of these on divorce. But we've never actually done one on relationships that are currently happening, currently in progress, active relationships. So we're going to talk about that today. We have three wonderful guests that you've all heard before. I have links to the episodes that they've been on in the show notes, and they each have blogs that they've written for our website, Men's Therapy Online. So there's a ton of great stuff, and I can't wait for you to learn from them. So if you're in a relationship that you feel like you're just kind of missing something, whether it's sex, whether it's emotional connection, or you're just too busy dealing with all the stresses of lives and kids and you just want to get back to enjoying each other again, this is the episode for you. So we'll start with some introductions. So if you all could say a little bit about who you are and what your work with men has been. Shayna, let's start with you.
Hi, I'm Shayna James, and I've been coaching men for about 20 years. I feel really honored that I get to be an ally for men. I started working in a workshop called the Authentic Man Program, where we as a team of women would come in and give men honest and loving feedback. And I fell in love with men, and it changed my life. And so I love supporting men and also being a woman that men can come to and say anything and feel anything. And I can be right in there with them to support and heal and learn to understand women for those who are in heterosexual relationships.
And Shayna has a shit ton of content and a wonderful podcast, 2 podcasts actually of her own, and a great book called Honest Sex. So we'll have links to all of her stuff, but she's a wealth of information, a true expert. So you're really in store for something great. Jack, how about you?
Hi, my name is Jack Lambert. I'm a licensed mental health counselor out of New York City. I specialize in working with gay and queer men around a variety of issues. And it's essentially been my, I think, 4th or 5th time being on this podcast. And I'm thrilled to be back.
You always bring so much. Like it's a super unique perspective. And it's like, I just love how you ask those important questions. You know, like I think that is so key. I think you and I share in common where we kind of poo-poo our industry in a way. You know, I think therapy industry is like very limited in many ways. And I like that you are really breaking the norms and challenging some of the messages that some of our listeners may have heard and realize don't really work for them.
Yeah, absolutely. Try to do that a little bit every day.
Yeah. And Melissa, last but not least, the newest addition to our roundtable.
Yes, thank you, Mark. My name is Melissa Ryan. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a licensed professional counselor in Colorado. And as everyone was introducing, I'm like, when did my journey with men begin? I mean, they've been around since I was born, obviously. But what sticks out is a pivotal moment when I was a young woman. And one of my first jobs, in fact, my first professional job was working on a construction site when I was 17 years old. And then I went on, that was like over summer. And then I went on to work for a construction company as a project engineer, and lots of stories and lots of experiences there. Very rich, lots of humor, lots of boundary stuff. And so that's really informed, I guess, how I can really connect and talk the talk, I think, in a different way. And then also being part of the adventure community and being surrounded by men when I'm mountain biking or skiing or snowmobiling, etc. So I talk a lot about that on my Substack. And then the universe gifted me with a little man to raise. I have a 4-year-old, and I've been in partnership with my spouse of 15 years. So all of that I bring to the work and couples work, which I've been doing for the last decade. So I'm excited to hear everyone's perspective on this roundtable. See where we go.
I've known you for a decade, it feels like at this point, and I'm always excited to keep doing more stuff with you. And listeners, yes, you mentioned it briefly, but I'll just hype her up a little bit. Check out her Substack, Bike Therapy. Really awesome, especially if you are into outdoor adventure sports and something that you want to do with your partner. I know in Colorado, that tends to be the number one filter for relationships if you have the same hobbies and do the same stuff outside. And she dives into all the different emotional depth that comes with something as simple as you would think, like running together or biking together. But there's so much more often going on. So check that out. That's Bike Therapy on Substack. So let's dive right into the podcast. So I just want to start with kind of a big question: is how do relationships fail? Because I think a lot of people come to therapy with like the big event. Maybe there was an act of infidelity, or there was a giant fight, or someone got too drunk and said something that they didn't want. But really, and what I see, and I imagine what you all see, is that it just deteriorates over time, right? It's not a big event. It's a slow burn that creates these gaps. So I'm curious if each of you could talk about what actually kills relationships. What are some of these things going on underneath the hood that are often more subtle and sometimes don't get caught or addressed until it's far, far too late?
I mean, writing the book Honest Sex for me was maybe a tribute to the belief I have that honest relationships are what make relationships last. And a kind of mature honesty where people are talking about their desires and their fears and their concerns. And so they're really getting to know each other. I mean, it takes a kind of generosity, I would say, also, and a desire to get to know each other and have the relationship, feel like it's working for both people. But I think often what gets in the way is not talking about things and, not wanting to hurt someone's feelings or feeling inadequate in some way, or, I've got to be this way to make this other person happy, but the other person doesn't even know what you're trying to do. So the foundation for me is having these kinds of honest conversations and really getting to know each other and creating win-wins in the relationship where both people get to feel loved and supported and heard and understood.
I'll just second that to say, like, those are all, I would say, like the amazing things that we talk about when relationships start. And then once you're 5-10 years in, it's almost this, it becomes so commonplace, like, oh, we did all of that. Now we just get to be comfortable and, and just be together, which there certainly is a part of that I think is really helpful and nice. But I would say a large part of couples therapy is getting the couple to say those things to each other again. They might feel them internally and just say, well, it's obvious, you should know at this point that this is how I feel about you. But I think so often the other person sometimes goes, I don't, because I haven't heard that in years. You might just assume that. So part of what I think leads to that slow decline is just a comfortability that has its pros and cons.
Yeah. And just to echo what both Shayna and Jack spoke to, and what you were saying, Mark, in my experience, it's death by 10,000 paper cuts in a relationship. And it seems like everyone is aligning with that. And I see how in courtship, there's this like emphasis of what Jack's speaking to, where there is the honesty and the intimacy and the generosity. It's almost as if like, oh, we can say what we really mean because there's positive sentiment override happening in those early stages. And then, knowing the course of rupture, disharmony, repair, and rupture being just a normal course of relationship. And what I see get us off course is that there isn't usually skills around effective repair. And effective repair isn't about accommodating and saying like, oh, it's no big deal. But inwardly, I am self-sacrificing my own truth. And that will come at the cost of resentment and potential guilt and all kinds of toxic things that can enter the field. And it's also not like taking all the responsibility, right? Or not taking any. It's like this balance of holding those truths. And it's strange because you invest so much. So you have this like robust garden and you're like, oh, like I just need to water it every so often. It's no big deal. And what we don't realize is that just like anything in nature, you still got to attend to it and make sure, I mean, the collective is not relational. It's pretty anti-relational. So if you don't have ways to protect your relationship garden and you just leave it to its own devices, likely the unhelpful, toxic individualism are going to seep through and your garden's going to die. Likely. That's my prediction.
I like the idea of toxic individualism. I really think that that's an interesting way to look at it too, because there's that balance, I think, again, in the beginning versus in the middle or near the end of a relationship to say like, well, I want to keep myself in this, but that can take a turn to kind of say, well, I'm taking myself and I'm taking myself away from this, either consciously or subconsciously.
Yeah. And you bring up a good point of like, how do you have your individual voice? I mean, Shana spoke to this too, of like your individual, like the win-win, which is different than, I just wrote about this in the blog, so it's really fresh in my mind, the negotiation strategy of compromising, where you each lose a little, whereas win-win is collaborative. It's like my needs and your needs come together and we co-create a strategy that works for both of us.
Right. Even if we don't know if it's possible. And it's like, it reminds me of the framing of going from codependent to independent to interdependent, where it's like, all right, when you're codependent, you're just trying to, feel good or make the other person feel good. And then you're independent, you can swing to the other side of the spectrum where it's like, okay, now I'm going to take care of me. And the interdependence is so beautiful, where there's a sense of, okay, we have a balance of togetherness and separation, agency and communion, and we care for each other, and we also care for ourselves and know ourselves enough that we can make those requests, or know when we're getting grumpy or need some space, but also know when we're wanting some connection or touch or things like that.
Yeah, I guess to anchor it on men, I see it's one of those two extremes, truly. Like either you have the guy that is a complete nice guy and has given up everything, often kind of like a martyr, right? He's stopped doing all of his activities. He's let his health and his body go, right? He's taken a step back at work, right? He's just given everything into the relationship and then blows up in a, fiery ball of destruction, right? 5, 10, 15 years later. Or you have the guy that's maybe more on that kind of, narcissism end of the spectrum, right? That refuses to give anything, that is like, I'm not going to change. You're not going to change me. I don't need to make any concessions here. So I'm curious if you could talk about this individuality versus, interdependence piece, because I feel like a lot of men, we don't really get educated on that. And we often die on one of these two hills of either the self-sacrificing martyr or the like super headstrong narcissist.
It's hard with so many people to know who's going. Go ahead.
Well, I'm not even going to say anything helpful, but I was going to throw a wrench in there and say, like, I wonder, there's a third that I've seen, which is kind of like the covert narcissist guy who fully kind of comes in there and feels like, well, I have so little to do to change, but I'm so scared that this other person is going to leave, and that it creates this dynamic of, I'm blaming myself for all these things, but what could I possibly do, and how dare they, be living their life or doing these things as well. And that's a tricky pull, that I've found that comes up for men sometimes as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy. I think men in many ways were very black and white, right? Either we're in that victim mentality, which I hear you talking about, of just like complete powerlessness, right? Or we're in that total bully mode. I think it's really hard for men to be more fluid and flexible in relationships and adapt to the changing situation.
Well, there's not a lot of forms for men to fit into their, like, in popular media for them to be. There is kind of the nice guy, which I think historically is like, you get walked over and people aren't really that interested in you, or we have the cold, brutish, that the woman hanging off the arm. Like that's such, it's so limiting.
Yeah. And it's just reminding me of the box that so many men find themselves in around strength, being separate from vulnerability. And how many men clients I've had who this just makes me laugh, even though it's sad, but it's like they will jump out of a plane or go whitewater kayaking, but when I'm like, have you told your wife or your partner, right? If they're in a heterosexual relationship, often I tend to work with men who are in relationships with women because they come to me to understand women. So, have you told her that you're feeling this way? And it's like, oh, no, that's, kind of terrifying. And I get it, right? Because I think relationships bring up our youngest parts and this feeling of survival and, belonging and all of that. But it's also so interesting to me how much easier that physical risk can be than the emotional risk. And that has me curious about you, Melissa, because I know you are.
So that's a underhanded pitch. That's a softball pitch to her.
Well, I mean, what I was reflecting on is just, I'm conscientious of speaking to him because I'm like, if he hears this, he hasn't given me consent to talk about him. So I want to speak and he can't really. And so I think a lot about that. I've been thinking about that even more. And just witnessing him and his peers, right? He's really at an age. Carol Gilligan did a really interesting study. She's written a lot. She was the first really author in our field to write about adolescent girls in their own voices. I think it's her original piece that she published. But she did this study with little boys and their fathers. And the little boys were 4. And what I recall about the study was that she met with these dads for 10 weeks or something. And some of the questions she asked them were, what do you appreciate most about your sons? And what they shared matches what I experienced with my son and other boys at this age, which is 4, which is that they're so out there. They're just full spectrum humans. Patriarchy hasn't come in and shut down half of their humanness, shut down their hearts. And it's just so beautiful and moving. And it helps me connect with my own sensitivity and things I have lost on my own journey to adulthood. So I love it. And the other question she asked, that's I recall from the research, is what do you notice about your own journey to manhood? And they talked about the ways in which they had to adapt. And one of them was their relationships with their friends, because that was another thing that they appreciated about their sons was they were so open and loving. And, when I go to my son's preschool, they say goodbye and they're hugging each other. They're practicing consent, of course. Their teachers direct them around that, but there's just such an openness and lovingness. And then, you just a few years later, I have seen it that goes away. And already by 7, there's such a transformation. And by 12 and then 16. And I think about in my own family, witnessing boys becoming men and that loss of the sense of self, being full out there, courageous, and then also connection with others.
And it's interesting you bring that up too, because I think a lot of time with gay men that I work with, they feel less inclined to need to fit into, more masculine norms, but not completely out of it, right? There's such a, hypermasculine boost that you get both relationally and sexually. And what ends up happening from what I've seen is people become confused as to why emotionally they feel that they have this ability and this vernacular to be able to discuss things, but they're still feeling clunky in the way of I can express myself, but I don't exactly know when, and I don't exactly know the best way to do it. And it leads to a lot of the exact same thing, which are, as Mark, you mentioned, pulling towards these poles of well, then I guess I'm just going to be the nice guy, or I guess I'm just going to be, this more aloof person. So it's hard to escape, even, if you do feel more comfortable, having some movement outside of those norms.
Yeah, I'm curious if y'all could talk to some of the resistance to being honest, because I think as therapists, right, we're all gonna advocate for more honesty, more vulnerability, right? Like have those tough conversations, communicate, deal with the conflicts. And we'll talk about that later in the episode of how to actually do that. Because I think a lot of guys, like we're saying, don't have any models for that. But what comes to mind is from some of John Gottman's book, Man's Guide to Women. He says, women are afraid of men killing them, right? Which is its own thing. But the second part of that quote is that men are afraid of women humiliating them. Right. And I think men are really, really terrified of losing status, right? Of being knocked down on the hierarchy, of being cast out, of being humiliated on the emotional realm, right? It's as scary for us as women feel on the physical dimension in relationship. And I think that's something that a lot of men, we maybe feel but don't want to admit, and a lot of women maybe don't quite understand how much men are really afraid of like emotional damage. When both of you were saying like physical damage, we seem to not really care too much about that. But when it gets to that emotional realm, there's a lot of fear. So I'm curious what each of you see as far as resistances to being more open or how that fear shows up in some of the guys that you work with.
I just want to honor too that it's not just emotional, right? When you talked about being cast out and losing status and all, like that actually it's a social thing as well, right? And it could be a survival thing because a lot of the men I've talked to who have had hard divorces or divorces that they didn't choose, they have the fear that things are going to be used against them, right? So if I open up, that's going to be used against me. So I often work with men to, figure out, okay, how do you slowly test the waters and sort of dip your toe in to see who is this stranger that I'm talking to if they're starting over again? And is this person safe to share a little bit more and a little bit more? Then when I think about being in relationship, men could lose their kids. The legal system isn't as supportive of men often in divorce as it is with women. So yeah, I mean, there are some really, really big potential losses that can completely, wreck a man's world. So yes, there's the emotional piece, but also it goes so much deeper than that.
It's interesting, though, how even when, we might hear something or like their social circle might hear something and it's like, well, that's not going to happen. That extreme case is not going to happen, whether just like, statistically or just it isn't that situation, but the feeling is so similar of like if I'm humiliated, it feels like I'm going to be cast out, or it feels like something is going to be taken away from me in such a big, meaningful way, which I think a lot of men don't have the language for saying that. And so maybe that is the first step that I take with a lot of guys, is just to be able to say, well, can you name the emotion in the room? Because if you can be okay with you yourself in a space saying, I am scared of being humiliated, or I felt humiliated and I don't want to feel that way again. And if you can say that and touch that and it doesn't destroy you and nothing catastrophic happens, it might feel like a small way, but I kind of frame it as like, well, if you can do this, then you can feel that way in the future and also not let it destroy you. You're just building a case for that. So it is strengthening that muscle that, we could point back and I'll often go back and say like, well, when's the first time that someone told you you weren't allowed to be humiliated or you weren't allowed to feel something? And then everyone has a story, and it's like the first grade teacher or my dad or, whatever it might be. But, I laugh because it's a little boilerplate therapy thing that people really have a reaction to and kind of say like, oh yeah, that felt horrible. And that's what I'm trying to avoid.
Which is its own intelligence, right? Like, of course, the nervous system has adjusted to self-protect, to get them to this strategy. It's a good short-term strategy. It's just not great for them long-term, as evidenced by, there's just so much data, and I'm sure, Mark, you speak to it, around suicide and substance abuse disorders and loneliness and addiction and other, process addictions. And we could go on about the ways in which this strategy to survive isn't great long-term for men with their mental health and their relationships and how things play out for divorce. And So that's what's so obvious to me in raising a little boy is like, I don't want those things for him. And I can't change the collective. I can help his nervous system. I can speak. I like to name what's really going on. And that's sometimes uncomfortable, particularly around substance use, right? And so we talk very openly with my son in ways that he can understand of like, me and my partner are both in recovery. We had issues with alcohol in the past, and we speak with him about that like, yep, we used to do that. It's very common in our culture, and it's poison. And this is the way in which, and we keep it simple and in his language. And then we talk to him when he observes family members or friends drinking, and we say, well, they have alcohol in their system, and you notice they're a little different. And then just have him share his observations. And I've been talking to him about other norms around the expectations of boys or the expectations between children and adults. It's an experiment. I don't know how it's going to go. It feels genuine. I'm doing my best to look to the models in the world. And I have a lot of training with Terry Real, and he's talked a lot about his boys. I met them at the conference they had, and or at least saw them speak, and they seemed pretty grounded. So that seems hopeful.
I was just thinking too of the word sovereignty. It comes up for me. It's like, as I'm working with men, usually if they're afraid, again, except for these horrid cases, it's like what you were talking about, Jack, when there is that fear of experiencing that emotion again or something. It's like, if they can get to a place where there is that kind of sovereignty and love for themselves, then if somebody else says, what are you, crazy? Or that's ridiculous, or I can't believe it, or you're such an asshole, or right, any of those things, but that thing is real for them, that they could say, wow, okay, I'm sorry you feel that way. And, this is what's true for me. I think that is underlying, some of the things you're pointing to also, Melissa, like, as we start to know our perspective and have this sense of self that isn't wrong or bad, or, there's something off here about what I'm feeling. This is actually what my experience is. Then you can come into relationship and not be defending or trying to prove yourself. Then there's more freedom for people to really have those conversations and care for each other and see like, ooh, that one feels really hard to admit to you. And, this is actually what's going on for me, and I'm afraid you're going to judge me. And I also have the capacity to know that if you judge me, I still don't have to judge myself.
Yeah, Shannon, I think you're talking about something really important there, right? Of like, I think a lot of men, one, we don't know how to vocalize our needs. Two, I think we're taught not to have needs, whether it's from that nice guy perspective as, I'm just a family man, I'm just a dad, I do everything for my family, or from that tough cowboy perspective, right? Like, both of them funnel into the idea of like, you don't need needs, right? Like, you don't need shit. And I think, we're conditioned that the needs, I talk to my guys, they're like, I want to have more sex and I want to fight less. Like, that's it, right? And there's so much more. But I think for guys, because we don't know, we're often like ashamed of what our needs might be, right? They might feel weak, right? Or, if there's homophobia in the mix, they might feel feminine, right? They might feel like parts of ourselves that we don't want to own. And then if you never talk about those, your relationship just falls apart. So I'm curious from your work, what are some needs that men come to? Because I really think it'll be helpful for our listeners just to like have some language for like, what could you possibly need in a relationship, and the one that stands out to me that I think a lot of guys struggle to ask for, but often take aggressively, is space. I think the statistics show that more men, I guess, compared to women, are avoidantly attached, where women tend to be more anxious attached. And avoidant attached people need space and quiet to like process their emotions, right? To like think things through, to come out, to figure out what you want to say, to figure out what you feel, to strategize. Men, we often get up in our head. And I think we aggressively take space by storming off and going to the man cave, right? Or getting, going to the golf course or get on the fishing boat or whatever. But I think for a lot of guys, just to ask like, hey, I just need like 12 hours to think about this, or I need to actually not talk to you about this for a while. But, I'm going to come back and we're going to have a more in-depth conversation. I think just that tip can be really powerful for a lot of guys. If you find that you truly do need space and silence and peace and solitude to figure out like what you're feeling, and more importantly, what you want to do about it. But I'm curious for each of you, like, what are some other needs that a guy could maybe have in a relationship?
Well, it sounds like you're talking about something that's really helpful across the board for therapy too, is just like understanding your processing speed. If you're so confused as to why your partner can so quickly sit down after an argument or during an argument and talk about things, and you feel red, or you just feel like completely at a loss for words, and then feel like you are at the bottom end of that conversation because you can't eloquently get yourself to a place that feels like, well, I'm trying to tell you how I feel, but I just can't understand. Like knowing that, okay, I do need some time in order to process this, and my partner doesn't, creates more of an even playing ground, at least. And I would say that's a big one, is just saying like, I need some space and I know why. It isn't just, well, I'm angry, I need to leave, or I'm feeling upset and I need to not feel this. It's no, I'm taking time to process, and I can label that and even tell my partner about it. But along with that, I would say the thing that comes up for me the most is just appreciation. I think that is, again, something that if you were to ask your partner, more likely than not, they would say like, of course I appreciate you and I appreciate these things, but not always is that communicated. And I think that is something, men like to hear, because they sometimes, in this idea of, oh, I'm stuck in this box of like, I'm the doer, that sometimes that becomes isolating in and of itself. And it's just assumed that I would do these things. And that's my niche in the relationship. And I would like it to be noticed, in some way, shape, or form. And I think that's different for each guy.
Yeah, I was thinking along the lines of appreciation, which I totally agree with, is respect. And that can be defined very differently for different people. But I mean, I grew up in a family where that respect, it's hard to talk about. I don't think my parents are ever going to listen to this, but, similar to your kid, Melissa, like, what I really saw was this underlying disrespect that neither one of them communicates from a place of care. Or, sometimes I actually say to people, like, think of your partner as your friend, even beyond your partner or your lover, because sometimes we treat our friends with more kindness and respect than we do with our partners. And it's like, okay, even to ask for that, I think you get to say like, hey, I need to feel respected. And it doesn't have to, anytime you're asking for these things, it doesn't have to come out as a demand, or, it doesn't have to be obnoxious. It can be very strong and open-hearted at the same time, like it's hard for me to be in this dynamic for this reason. And I'm realizing that I need us to respect each other. Let's figure out what that means. How do you feel respected? How do I feel respected? So that's definitely one of the foundations I see.
It's so funny that you say that too, because I am so used to seeing, or just kind of, again, the stereotype of like the couple that's been together for 50 years and they're just ripping into each other. And the joke is, well, they love each other. That there's such a deep bond, and this is how it's indicated. And I think that there's, cultural implications beyond this as well, but to kind of that idea of like, you speak most harshly to the people that you love, that also can easily take this turn into like, well, I'm so comfortable, I can talk to you any way that I want and know that I can get away with it, even if that's not the conscious choice. But even kind of identifying, would I speak that way to my friend or to, my child or to, someone on the street? Like, is there a way that I'm acting dynamically different with this person because I feel love or comfortability with them?
And if you think you're getting away with it, check out to see how close or intimate you feel with that other person. Because if you don't feel really connected, or you're not having sex, or you're not feeling like you're safe, or you can tell that other person anything. Yeah.
I'm going to borrow one that's been coming up in my own life. Something I've been working with my partner and our couples counselor, which is this idea, which I named also with my son, of consent, when I share feedback. So I am a faster processor, which I'm aware of, and I'm very conscientious of like fair fighting rules. So I'm not I'm not calling any names. I'm not going into blaming language. I'm speaking to the relational field, and my vibe can be pretty intense because I'm like, oh, I want to share truth, but will you be able to? I'm like overthinking everything, and that energy I then am bringing to my partner, and I haven't always explicitly sought consent. So that can really be a need. You all have spoke to this of understanding the processing speed and what you need and being able to articulate not right now in a relational way, like Mark said, don't leave them hanging, and then following back like, hey, you have this thing that you brought up. And like that would build so much trust, right? If you're the avoidant attachment more is your style and you came and circled back to your partner who's maybe a little more anxiously attached, gosh, that would earn that'd be such a great deposit for your relationship. But I think like that isn't always explicit. And especially like something that's been sticking out in my mind is Terry Real speaking to, you can learn these tools and then they can become weaponized against your partner. I've had clients talk about that in terms of nonviolent communication, that they have felt like that has been weaponized against them. And so one of the things that helps me, which can help men or anyone listening, is the sense of urgency. Like if you have a sense of urgency, I need to say or do this thing, you're likely not in your wise adult. Because wise adult, you can sense and attune to timing, you can attune to consent, you can attune to the respectfulness of your words, you can bring in appreciation, you can tap into love. You cannot, in my experience, tap into any of those beautiful, wonderful things for a relationship if you're hijacked by your survival strategies, your adaptive child. And so I may think, and my adaptive child, she's very smart and she brings in the research, and I think I am speaking for my wise adult. And my partner's real-time response to me usually is my clue if I am or not.
That's such a good point, because I think about that with processing speed too, and using that as language. Like that is so easily something with the memification of therapy terms that someone could just throw in someone's face. You say, well, you can't say what you're going to say because I need time to process and to be able to shut down a conversation and create more rupture, where, that's not the point of it as much as it is like, can you listen and be able to know, like, I will respond to this at some point. I don't need to have all of the answers right now. Like, if anything, more of this should be, as funny as it is that we're talking about relationships, I always kind of frame it as like, this is your work in this that lets you get closer to this person, rather than this is the work to create and pull this person to you.
I like that a lot. And I'm thinking about all of us are, there's kind of a theme in there too of like knowing your partner, knowing each other again. And that, to me feels like a need that men may not think of, like, oh, I need my partner to actually know me. I mean, my partner may not understand me, but I want my partner still to know that, this is my processing speed, or this is the timing I need, or I need some kind of context, like you're saying, Melissa, or, I need to ask whether I'm ready for feedback. And all of those things have me also think about the need for a partner to, I'm curious what you all think about this, but one way I frame it is assume the best. Like, oftentimes I think what kills a relationship is when people go to, well, you just did that because you wanted to hurt me or you wanted to get back at me, versus having the curiosity to say, I'm going to assume the best about my partner and imagine that if something didn't go well, it's because, something got in the way, or they have a wound, or all these things. And I'm going to actually get curious and ask them. I'm going to see the best in that person and then ask them, hey, what happened? So if you came home late, it's not like, well, fuck you, you're getting back at me. It's more like, hey, I know you value me and this doesn't feel good to me, so I'm curious what happened. If people aren't in a relationship where that's a foundation, I know that can be a shift, right, to get there, and there's some baggage and there's some history. But I do think that's a need that a lot of people don't necessarily think of. But once they hear it, they're like, hey, I want that.
Yeah, I think a lot of guys express that as like the need not to be the villain, because I think it can easily become like this like us versus them, right? Or this antagonistic relationship where it's like, yeah, like you said, you're doing this just to piss me off, or you always do this, right? And then it just becomes this really shitty relationship. Another one that comes to mind, riffing off what you said, Shannon, that I wanted to jump in and say was, being heard and seen, right? Like you talk about that. And I think, for most of them I work with, again, pretty heteronormative, like dudes, right? It's action, not words. I think that's a common misconception, right? So there's a client who I was just thinking about as you were talking, who is going through like a weight loss journey, right? He's something that he's avoided for years. He's finally ready to like go to the gym, exercise, get healthy. He talks to his partner about it all the time. She's super emotionally supportive, right? She's into it. She's helpful. She like is there every step of the way. She says all the right things. I love you no matter what, but I'm here to help. Like, do it. She's like a cheerleader, right? But then she bakes cookies, right? She bakes cookies and sets them out, or she, bakes all this favorite food, which for this individual is a lot of comfort food, macaroni and cheese and pasta and heavy carbs. And my client was deeply disturbed. I mean, I thought it was truly going to like wreck the relationship, because it wasn't about the food. It was about, well, she's telling me she understands me, but she's not actually helping me, right? She's not actually doing the stuff. She's not like contributing to the shared project. And ultimately he didn't feel heard and understood, So I think it's like that combination of insight and action so that there's trust and that there's respect ultimately. I think words are a good start, but I find for most of my guys, it's really the actions that speak a lot louder than the words when it comes to being heard and seen and known.
And having the language to bring up, I'm so appreciative that you're doing this, but just where I am now, this is how I'm perceiving this, and obviously that's such a clinical way to do that. But the idea of that, of saying like, it'd be so easy just to say like, well, she's showing me that she loves me, and I don't want to threaten that by bringing something up.
Did you have one, Melissa? You were going to say something before.
Yeah, and then I lost it. Well, I wrote down when you were sharing, Shayna, I think when you all were sharing earlier, which is remember love, to come back to this is a person I love. When you're activated, at least from my own experience, it is like the dark night of the soul, and it is so hard to find that love for myself or the other person. Like it's just like pure survival. And what has helped, right, our practices, and I don't know if we are moving into solutions, but our practices to increase my relational mindfulness. It's my relationship with myself, the parts I struggle with through meditation and yoga and my bike therapy and time in nature and relational conversations and reading and podcasts about relationships and really immersing myself. It's its own way of orienting in the world. And I didn't come from that, right? My family is the rugged individualism, homesteading on both sides of my family. They have their own strategies on my maternal and paternal side, but ultimately, it did not lead to a lot of relationality and how conflict has been handled historically. Two different strategies, but still does not get you to a real repair. And so that's certainly wired in the nervous system. And so just like learning another language, I was recently in Mexico. And it's really funny because I know a little bit of Spanish and I have a degree in French and lived in France. So what kept coming out was French. I would try to remember the Spanish word, but instead I would just naturally respond with French, which is funny. And it's like, yes, that is it, right? Like that other perspective, relationality is a whole nother language. And you could take 1 hour of French or Spanish or Russian a week, and you'd probably learn some words. You would not be fluent. Fluency comes from the immersion. And this is a whole different framework. We all that have been raised in Western society come from the individualism. U.S. ranks number 1 on the spectrum of individualism versus collectivism on that spectrum. And so it is like in us, we are swimming in the water. And so to transcend that, we have to immerse ourselves in relationality if we want that.
Yeah. And be okay being maybe not good at it at first, which I think is something that for men, but for all people, like it's hard to admit, at any point in our lives, but especially if we're like, oh, I've been in this relationship for a long time, it's hard to admit there are some things that I just don't feel good at or don't know about. Or, if you're listening to this podcast and you're like, oh, I haven't really thought about that before. Like there isn't an expectation that these things, because a long-term relationship is something you're constantly learning about. You shouldn't know 6 years in a relationship how exactly you should look 6 years in a relationship. One, because it's different for everyone, but also it is a novel experience. So just having the validation and the comfort of like, everyone says relationships are hard work, but this is what that means. It's that, like it shouldn't always be a cakewalk. It shouldn't always be like, oh, obviously I know how to repair this rupture. Obviously I know how to look at someone and think the most positive thing about them. Like, no, sometimes that requires a big mental shift.
And I would just add, like, saying that to your partner, right? Because, we were talking a little bit about that, like dating to relationship transition. And I think, as men, we're taught, it's in all the media, like we got to show that we got our shit together when we're dating, right? Like you present like you're competent at everything and there's no insecurity and you are emotionally deep and you can be romantic and you got everything figured out and you're trying to like, you're courting, right? You're trying to be attractive to your, potential partner here. And then I think it can be really jarring for both you and your partner where it's like, well, I actually don't know how to do this that well. But I think the silver lining is that I have found if you can be honest about that, most people are pretty receptive to it, but you do have to first own the fact that you're trying something new. And like you said, Jack, it's going to be clumsy and shitty and you might have more fights before you have less, right? But that you're doing it because you love them and you care and you're trying to like improve the foundation of their relationship.
For me, when I work with men, I teach them about what I believe is true confidence, that confidence isn't I am capable of everything. It's that I actually trust myself to roll with or meet whatever comes my way. And so that to me is what you're talking about too, where it's like you can say to someone, hey, this is challenging for me and I'm not sure I'm going to get this right. Or you can be like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I don't know how to do this. And that's the more apologetic way that isn't that sense of true confidence. So right, as you can build the confidence in yourself from that place of sovereignty of I am good, even if I have parts and things that I don't know if I can do it or I don't know how, right? I'm still a good human being. And sometimes we need to re-imprint or, right, we come to therapists or coaches because it's like, oh, I need to shift that old narrative that I have that I learned in my family or my system growing up that told me all these shitty ideas about myself. And, I have a very, very strong inner critic that I still work with to this day after decades of working on it. And I need other people sometimes to help me see who am I really? Because I'm getting lost in the skewed mirror sometimes.
Which, Shayna, I imagine with that vulnerable share that you just had, that could connect you with dudes, right? Because sometimes some of the most confident dudes have like the worst critics. And so your ability to hold your sovereignty, right? Hold power and still be in relationship to fluidly move between those energies of interdependence. I remember telling a somatic therapist, I can do really good with like the fluid feminine energy or really good with the masculine energy, but bringing them together is a mess. And how do you weave in between those? And it reminds me a lot of, because I speak to this mountain biking, of I need both strength and finesse with the most challenging trails. And the better you get at it, which I have found with relationality and any challenge that I've taken on, parenting included, the more fun it is. Like the more enjoyable the practice is. And initially it kind of sucked. Like when I first learning mountain biking, there were a lot of scrapes. I fell into some cactus one time. That sucked. I have so many stories of challenge, yet I love that. And humans love that, right? Our brain lights up when we're learning, when we can be in that zone of just enough challenge to engage us, not too much challenge that we're overwhelmed and flooded. And so part of this too really is like helping men, probably, I imagine you both and Mark speak to right sizing the challenge so that they can build that authentic confidence and figure out environments where they can test out these skills, and build, right, that exposure therapy of like, and helping them assess risk too, of like, is the juice worth the squeeze in terms of taking on this challenge?
And I'm glad you said that, Melissa, because I was just thinking too, I'm like, we really have, and hopefully this is the point of this, is to be able to say like, these are some skills or things to look into or things to try to help bring the relationship closer or just build on things that are already good. But there's also space to say, our values have shifted over the past 10 years. I don't want to necessarily work on as much repair and pulling closer, and I might be ready to pull away or have this conversation of departing this relationship in a way that isn't, Mark, again, going back to like just storming off or exploding it so you don't have to take accountability for how you feel in this relationship. Like, there's also a healthy way that you can do this in a close way, as antithetical as that might sound, but like to be able to have that conversation and really check in with yourself of, if everything you've heard doesn't sound helpful, to have a space to be able to say, maybe I don't want to do the work, and examine that.
I've heard so many people say too, like, I don't know if my partner will do this or is capable of, doing any of these things. And I mean, if that's the reason why you want to leave, then I would definitely suggest having conversations first, right? Where you risk losing the relationship by asking, hey, could we do this together? Is this possible? Is this what you want? Because sometimes it can seem like, sometimes they can think, well, you must not want it because you're not doing it either, right? And then two people can be there sort of holding back, and neither one knows that the other is wanting the same thing. And yeah, so getting honest again, that can really bring our relationship back together. But I do think there's something too about being willing to risk, like you're saying, Jack, letting go. Because maybe this isn't the phase for us anymore. Maybe we've changed too much. Maybe we don't value the same things anymore. But if we can actually talk about that, then we can see, oh, could that be complementary? Or is that actually a sign that we're going in different directions?
Yeah, it doesn't have to mean that the relationship necessarily is over, but acknowledging it, can certainly help suss that out, because so much of that, it's such a horrible feeling to feel alone in a relationship. And that's one of the things that I think people really get stuck with, of like, I have all these things that I want to say and I can't tell the person that it would be most important to tell them to.
I'm curious to zoom in more on that. Like, there's that idea of like the 7-year itch, right? Where you're in a relationship for 7 years and then you change and you start to look outside the relationship. I think there's some truth to that. Like, people do change. Especially people listening to podcasts like these or engaging in, coaching or therapy services, like, you're trying to change yourself on some aspect. And we're not just talking about, you picked up a new hobby, right? We're talking about like you fundamentally changed as a person from your perspective on reality. I mean, there's nothing higher than that, that's truly like earth shattering. So when people do change, and I see it really commonly with people that have kids, right? And they focus their next 15 years on the kids, and they wake up and their kids are 18 and they're like, oh shit, who are you? Who is this person, right? Because, almost 20 years has passed. And of course you changed, So I guess my question for the group here is like, what do you do about that? How do you remain in connection during that changing process? And how do you maybe in some ways recreate the relationship, being that now you're 2 different years and you're, not to mention, you're a different stage of life, right? I mean, you're older, right? So things are different just physically as well as in your relationship.
I often suggest that people start dating each other again and taking that safety and that knowingness, sort of, setting it aside, because honestly, it's usually what you think if you've spent 15 to 18 years focusing on your kids and not really focusing on each other, you probably don't know each other as well as you think, because we're always growing and changing. And, sometimes even having limits where it's like, all right, we're going to get to know each other again, but we're not going to sleep in the same bed for a little while, or we're not going to have sex for a little while, or, building certain kinds of things like we did when we were dating, where, those limits were innate and then the safety takes over, and so then we have access to each other all the time. We can always be around each other. So yeah, I like the idea if somebody's starting to try to figure out, like, who are we actually to each other? If you can come together and co-create something that seems interesting or exciting, or something that could support the dynamic of building more of that excitement back in instead of just the safety, that can be a really interesting way to go about it.
Yeah, anything that feels novel, I think, is, we use the same concept when we talk about depression of like behavioral activation or doing something that could have positive effects. Like if it feels safe and trusting between the two of you to engage in something, then go for it. I think that's like the couples therapist dream, is just like, if you want to do this, go, let me know how it goes. Like there's a fun aspect of getting to know each other again, or of rekindling something like exciting. I would definitely say, like, Melissa, I think of your like biking excursion, like that there are activities that are therapeutic in nature that don't necessarily have to be sitting on a couch and talking to someone if that's not your cup of tea, or maybe that is, your entryway point to that. But there's just this huge part of this that is not talking necessarily about conflict and repair, and talking about, let's have fun together, or let's have like a sexy time together. Like I work with a lot of, gay men who are in open relationships or practicing non-monogamy. And there are aspects of that I've found that redefine a relationship of the primary couple in a fun and exciting way that is enjoyable, rather than having it be, just simply more work to be able to like have that communication and set those boundaries. So that's always gratifying as a therapist to see as well, to kind of, you sometimes do couples work where it's like, I'm helping this couple break up, which is certainly fine and valid, but sometimes it's nice to really see, strength coming from these exercises as well.
So one of my favorite activities to begin couples work is exploring basically the mission and vision of a couple. So mission being like, why are they together in the first place? And a lot of times couples, we don't realize we kind of follow a default of like, well, we dated and then we're supposed to get married and then we're supposed to buy a house. And like, that's not that compelling, because what makes us come alive is creativity, and that can feel creative. And a lot of times it can feel really limiting. So I invite that, like, what could you co-create that would be inspiring, that would give your relationship purpose? And then how would that manifest in a vision? Like, where are we headed? What could your relationship be? And that speaks to what Jack was talking about, the fun of the relationship. It doesn't have to be, I would hope it wouldn't be all serious. One of the things I do enjoy is taking people outside and meeting them at trailheads. I've started doing that more over the summer and bringing that adventure element. And I've spoken to in my Substack this idea of type 2 fun. And people in the adventure community usually know what that means. But for those that don't, type 1 fun is like, it would be fun for everyone. Like a nice Ferris wheel. That might be fun for everyone, right? It's pretty chill. Type 2 fun it's like challenging, but just challenging enough that you're engaged. You might have some moments you don't like. Overall, you look back and you're like, gosh, I felt so alive. I felt so inspired. And type 3 fun isn't really fun at all. And it can be kind of survival sort of situations. And when you look back, you might still be like, oh, I don't know if that was fun. And like for me, I like the type 2 fun, and reframing my relationship in that way has actually made it more fun. I'm like, oh, I like type 2 fun. I like challenge. And so does my partner. And how can we experience our connection? Because we've been together over 15 years through lots of phases of life. How can we experience our relationship and connection in that way?
That's so good. And yeah, thinking about all of this, I'm like, okay, there's also, I'm imagining someone listening, if you are trying to restart your relationship or reignite passion, it's like you have a lot of complaints and there's a lot of frustrations. And so we've got to do something with those. I often talk about how complaints and desires are the opposite side of a coin. same coin. It's like if you have a complaint, you also have a desire. And most of us are very practiced at speaking our complaints and being like, this is what I don't like. This is why I'm frustrated. And when I was married, so I've been divorced. I remember like complaining that our sex wasn't as spiritual as I wanted it to be. And I felt like I was giving myself permission to complain because I'd asked for it a number of times. And then by then I was like, well, the only thing left to do is complain. And I realized later that that is not true and that complaining hardly ever works. I mean, there may be a situation where it works, but usually it's not going to. And so, you can make a list of all the complaints that you've had about each other. And then I would suggest turning that into a list of your desires, right? Where you can come to your partner and be like, I want this. I want it to go like, I want to explore this. And then you could even do something where you burn your list of complaints or you flush it down the toilet or whatever. Not to say you're invalidating those, but you're taking the what's actually going to be effective, what's going to communicate to your partner that there's room for more closeness or more intimacy, or what's going to create that, right? And then letting go of these are the things I want to bitch about, and checking yourself if you're really in a habit. I think you said, Mark, before, of being more in that victim role or feeling like I can't do anything to change this, or it's my partner's fault. Check that, because that's not inspiring another person. And if you're not inspiring another person, your relationship probably won't be inspiring.
Well, we're nearing the end of our episode here. I think we could keep going for like another 6 hours.
7 hours.
But yeah, but built on that, Shayna, and you can, of course, jump in with another one, but I'm curious from each of y'all, like, what is something practical? Or if someone's listening to this and they're like, hey, I'm inspired, I want to take action. I love the complaint to desire transmutation ritual, but I'm curious other things, right? Whether it's a prompt, right, just a way to start a conversation, whether it's something that's more ritual, more in action, or maybe just something to think about for themselves. What's something that somebody could do right now that would help, to use Melissa's language, help like water their garden a little bit, right? Help keep that relationship alive in the realm of emotional intimacy, sexual intimacy, or just really just rebuilding safety, respect, and trust.
I mean, the first one that comes to me is just I'm noticing statement. Like, I'm noticing it's been a while since we, had a loving conversation, or since we had sex, or since we felt X, Y, or Z, right? And I'm wondering, what we can do about it, or what we want to do about it, right? Like, I'm wondering, and then starting to get curious together. I'm wondering, like, is that bothering you, or, is that okay with you? And really coming back to that generosity of, not only do I want myself to have what I want in my relationship, but I want my partner to have what they want in the relationship, because I also know that uplifts us both. And then, right, like you said, Melissa, it kind of puts a deposit in the emotional bank account, or the love bank account. So really just noticing without judgment, if you can, without that sense of like, fuck you for this. It's more just, hey, there's a we here. We are together in this. We are a team, and I'm noticing this. What do we want to do about this?
I always go with a tried and true couples technique that I learned during a continuing education course that I just loved, and I use it both individually and with my couples, but just to build off that, like, noticing but appreciating too, of just being able to name 3 things a day. Try it for a week of just saying, I really appreciate when you cook me dinner, or I really appreciate it when we're on the couch and you rub my back. And having your partner, rather than say, oh yeah, just literally say, you appreciate when I made you dinner, or you appreciate when I rubbed your back on the couch. Because there's this idea too of just rebuilding the acknowledgement and being seen and being respected. Like, it touches on a lot of those things that we kind of talk about as being kind of like the death by 1,000 paper cuts, of just being able to kind of build a language around that. And I always kind of encourage my clients to know that it's an exercise, and know that it can feel bulky at first, like it's supposed to, because that's not always how two humans talk to each other. We're supposed to kind of lean into that a little bit as well. So as far as techniques goes, it's not something that you'll do every single day for the rest of your life, but it does just kind of give you a playing ground to practice, and even to say, did that feel weird? Did that feel good? And kind of playing around with that in some ways.
Yeah. And to go along with that, Jack, that really fits, right? That relational language that I was speaking to of like when you're learning a language, it does feel awkward and you mess up and you can use a more formal, verb or noun selection, right? And then as you get more comfortable with the languaging, it shifts because it no longer becomes something that I have to exert conscious effort. I start to develop unconscious competence. And that's what, I'm hoping for in lots of aspects of my life. So I love that of like, yeah, it will feel weird. And that's usually a good sign, I tell my clients, because if it doesn't feel weird, that means you're doing more of the same and you're going to get the same results. And we're trying to get something different, right? The other piece that I wanted to speak to was this idea of relationship reckoning, which you also spoke to, Jack, of like getting to a place to really look at the relationship and the phrasing of, am I getting enough in this relationship to grieve what I am not getting and celebrate what I am? And if you do the relationship reckoning and you're like, no, I am not, then you can, that might be the time to facilitate these honest conversations that we've been talking about, that Shayna started us off with, like speaking from a place of your heart and of honesty, saying what you mean, just don't say it mean, because you are in the shared relational field. And that is in your own integrity, right? We say we are kind because being kind is the best thing we can do for our nervous system, as evidenced by research on empathy. So it's not just about being kind because that's the nicest thing for this person that we say we love. It's also the kindest thing we can do for ourselves, to speak truthfully in a loving way.
Yeah, one of the things I'm hearing in a little bit of what everybody says, just to wrap us up, is giving grace. I find myself talking about that a lot more with my clients because I think, if we talk about this whole thing of being like, oh, well, they should know X, Y, and Z about me, or I should know X, Y, and Z about them, or I have all these like really, really rigid assumptions. And I think that there's more room for like accepting imperfection. And I think kind of, Shayna, what you were saying of like, assume people are coming with the best intentions. They just might be confused, but they're not like evil, right? Or like trying to name stuff that you think might be pretty basic and foundational, but like it's not going to change unless you change it. And maybe, shit happens and people get busy, right? It's like no one's going to be that perfect person for you, but hopefully you can be imperfect people for each other. And that's where I think like the love and the creativity and the real playfulness can kind of come at it, right? Is like knocking both of yourselves off those pedestals and knocking down their relationship so it can be more real, right? It can be more messy, but also more intimate. So on that note, I really enjoyed our conversation, folks. Where can people find you online if they want to hear more about you, if they want to read more about you, if they want to work with you? Melissa, we'll start with you.
Well, you already mentioned, Mark, I have a Substack. It's called Bike Therapy. So I was doing weekly. The last couple of months have been kind of challenging for me personally. So not as weekly, but that's a great way to connect. Or on my website, Cambium Counseling, or on LinkedIn too. That's another way I connect. So,
yeah. And Jack?
I am on Instagram, Jack Knows Best. I have a private practice here in New York, jacklambert.lmhc.org. And I have just recently joined the MTO team. So feel free to find me through the website there. If you're out of New York State and would like to meet, feel free to drop me a line there.
And Shayna?
Yeah, you can go to my website, ShaynaJamesCoaching.com, and Shayna is SHANA. And yeah, you can find my podcast, my book, blogs, resources, all kinds of things there. And there's a couple quizzes there around what keeps you from having the best love and sex of your life. If you're in a relationship and if you're looking for a relationship, what might be blocking you from finding love? So you can take those as well.
Well, all those links, listeners, will be down in the show notes. So you'll have tons of different ways to interact with these people. Do it. They have incredible content. If there's a listener, if there's a speaker that you really listen to and you connected with, definitely give them a follow on their platforms. There's so much good content. And if you're interested in us, everything we have is at Men's Therapy Online. URL is menstherapy.online. You'll find blogs from all three of these wonderful people, as well as 5 years of podcast episodes, hundreds of blogs at this point. We got a bunch of free quizzes, free courses. There's a ton of free content. If you do want to work with us, We have individual, couples, and group work that you can engage in. And our biggest thing that really differentiates us that I would encourage everyone to join is we have a Slack channel that is open to the public. That is a great place, a great community of guys that are all trying to get better. They're all trying to put this stuff into practice. It's a great thing that you can tap into 24/7. We have about, at time recording, like 300 guys on there. My hope is to 10x it by the end of the year. So go ahead, join that. Again, totally free. And it's a place for you to connect with other people doing the work. And you can message all three of these guests on that platform as well. They are there. They are active. We are posting blogs by them. So you can get access to these fantastic people through that medium as well as we're building out the MTO community. So thank you so much for tuning in. Guests, thank you for participating in this roundtable. It was a wonderful, wonderful conversation.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks so much.
And everybody, we'll see you next week, another episode of the Men's Therapy Podcast.